Hello and welcome to this week's Out in the Borderland. Today, we're heading indoors with the Brew & Pastor. We're crafting an oat beer in the German tradition.
Hi, I'm Andy Berry. I am the pastor at Little Fork Lutheran, but tonight we've been making a video about brewing beer. Brewing at the Little Fork VFW. They have been wonderful enough over the last year or so to let me brew during the dead of winter, which is really nice. And then also they have sinks, which is incredible. It sounds stupid, but it's so easy to clean things up when you have a nice sink, and a lot of brewing is cleaning. So I've been brewing now about 10 years, going on 11 now. So just love the process, fell in love with the creativity bit, and then, I mean, who doesn't like making their own beer? So what we need to do right now is we're going to get our steeping grains going. Today we're making a kit from Brewer's Best, and it comes with pre-crushed grains already, which is really nice. Then I don't have to get my barley crusher out. And then these kits come with everything. To get running on your own homebrewed setup is not all that difficult. Beer brewing is one of those activities where you can kind of dive in as deep as you want to. It really starts, what you'll see today when we brew, is we started with a 5-gallon extract recipe kit. I would suggest most people, if you want to start brewing with an extract recipe kit. You can get them from a lot of different places. Northern Brewer, Midwest Supplies are some of the bigger and easier places to find online. But I would say go to your local homebrew supply. If that's in our area, my favorite place to go is Wine Creations in Grand Rapids. Karen is awesome. She doesn't have all the answers, but she will look them up. And they have good prices on all their equipment and all their extracts, and she can get you going start to finish. Basically what you need to start brewing is a kettle that holds at least 3 to 4 gallons of water. It can be just like an enamel canner, but it just can't have any cracks in the enamel. And then you need a kit. Spoon is nice. I like a stainless steel spoon because it doesn't hold any flavor, but you can use your old reliable wood one too. And then you just need a source of heat. So turkey burners are awesome if you don't want to do it in the house. Otherwise your kitchen stove works just fine. And you just start with that kit, and that kit is going to have hops that you need. It's going to have all of the malt that you're going to need, whether it's dry or liquid malt extract. And it's going to have step-by-step instructions that'll walk you through the brew day process. And then you just need something that you're going to be able to do your fermentation in, like a brew pail, which is a 5-gallon or a 8-gallon pail with that seals really well, and then a fermentation lock. And the yeast comes with your kit, and that's basically all it is. You're making sweet wort. That wort is pre-beer, so this sweet wort that has been bittered with some hops, and then you add yeast, and there's your beer. Another popular way of getting into it is using like a Mr. Beer kit. There's a few less steps to Mr. Beer, but you're also kind of constrained as to the styles you can make because Mr. Beer takes some of those extra steps out. So I've never used Mr. Beer. I've always just done either kits or all grain. And like I said, you can dive into this and you can spend $10,000 on a brew setup easy, but you can also do it with a $30 kit and a pot you already had at home. So it comes with a brew sock to be able to throw it right in. I'm going to use the big one for this. And The brew sock is exactly what you'd think, a muslin bag sewn up that holds the grains so that you can pull them out. You don't want to boil them, you just want them to steep from wherever you start at until just before boiling. If they boil, they tend to get some pretty gnarly flavors that you don't necessarily want. Astringency, stuff across your tongue that feels like there's something there and I don't like it. That's the kind of the astringent flavor that boiled grains can give you. So just take that and we tie it off. And you can't, well maybe, there we go. Shake off the dust a little bit. Some dust came out in case you couldn't see. And then we just toss this straight into the brew pot. And just kind of jig it around, and so the water was clear before that, so, ooh, hey-o. These things happen. So I'm just going to tie this up so that I have the sock, at least part of it, out of the boiling water. And there we go. Now we're going to walk back over here. We're going to do something kind of special with this batch of beer, and that's first wort hopping. So these particular hops came from my hop yard over at my house here in Little Fork. And if you can see, this is a really crude, probably the crudest way possible of marking what type of hops these are. I believe they are Sterling, but I did that by putting each of the hop plants, and then I accidentally circled the wrong one, but then it's this one that I really wanted. That's the plant this is, so. Pouring the hops in the brew sock. So I'm just going to put, usually you'd measure these things. I'm not so concerned about the repeatability of this beer simply because a lot of the variables are nailed down already because of using a kit. And then some of the variables never can be reduplicated, like these particular Sterling hops. Every year they're going to taste different from my house. Same variety, but they're going to have some differentness to each batch. So just going to kind of go with that and embrace that this will be a one-time only beer. And first wort hopping, I'm going to actually pull these hops out before the boil. I just want them to kind of add a wonderful hoppiness, and it's supposed to be a smoother bitterness to the beer because they went in early versus later. But these are the specialty grains that are getting steeped here, are specifically used in the brew process for steeping, so they don't have to go through a mash. Other grains have to go through a mash. And as you look at the bag, I don't know if the steam is getting in the way, but you see a lot of lightness, a lot of darkness. There's a mix of different grains that are being steeped. The darker ones have been kilned longer when they were dry. So you're not really getting any sugar from them. You're mainly getting color and kind of a burnt or coffee flavor from them. And then the lighter grains that you can kind of see modeled in there, those probably do have some sugar in them that they're going to lend unfermentable sugar to the brew. So that'll be a flavor you'll be able to taste at the end of everything. The beer that we're going to be brewing tonight is a German alt beer, but I'm not really sticking to the recipe of the alt beer at all. So what this is a beer that's being brewed kind of in celebration or in memorial of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. Being a Lutheran pastor, you kind of get excited about the Reformation coming up on a 500th anniversary. So with that, there's a lot of excitement around Martin Luther and one of his favorite things, which was beer. And the fact that Katie Luther, his wife, brewed beer. She was the beer brewer of the family and particularly good at it. So as we look at Luther's life, there are not a lot of things that we know Luther drank, except this kind of proto-Oktoberfesty type beer, maybe even like a bock of sorts. But before that style actually solidified, there was this kind of Einbecker beer. And we know that Luther drank it with Katie at their wedding because it was a gift from one of the princes, Bavarian princes. So it's the one beer we know for sure that Luther would have had, and he said he liked it in the thank you note. So unless he's lying, we probably figure that Katie probably got requests to brew this later in her life. So this is sort of kind of a hint at that beer. So we're using a lager yeast. We're using 3 lager yeasts mixed together, more out of necessity than really design. And then the beer is going to be sort of like a light lager with a lot of flavor, and it's going to be heavily hopped, which is also things that were part of the description of the Einbecker beer. Is it exact? Not really, but it'll at least hearken towards that and get our imagination going on what it might have tasted like. So I'm just going to kill the boil right now, because we don't want active heat under that when we start to put our now hot liquid malt extract in there. So it's happier there. So, and this stuff brings a new meaning to the word sticky. So I'm going to do my best not to get it anywhere, but also not to waste any of it. So, because this is what produces the flavor, most of the flavor for the beer, and alcohol, which is also a big component of flavor. Yep, this would be almost all malted barley. There might be a little bit of wheat, but I don't think there is.
Så giv jorden seriøs, vi sagde noget til det. Hjørnet på mig lagt tæt op, når man nu er bedyr. Så giv jorden seriøs, vi sagde noget til det. And the sweet little love song is coming through the air. But I'm mountains and everywhere. And sweet little love song is singing.
I got into the hobby, homebrewing hobby, simply because there were a lot of beers I would read about in books and I wanted to try but were not available. I've never really lived in a lot of big areas, so for the most part you'd read about a Belgian Trappist beer and then you couldn't find it. And you'd hear a description of it and you'd think, boy, I gotta try that beer, and you couldn't find it. So you brewed it yourself instead of doing that. And also you can dream up just about anything in home brewing and make it. This fall, my wife Rachel was canning some beets, and I looked at the boil water from the beets and I thought, it's just too pretty, I can't throw that away. And that at the same time I was working with some apples that had gone a little bit bad because of fruit flies, and I thought, well, I can't just throw that apple juice away. So I ended up making an apple beet beer. Everything's boiled, so it's all sanitary and safe now, and it's actually turned out very well. But you just can't find that on the market. Nobody's making apple beet beer right now. So that's one of those beautiful things, is if you dream something up, you can do it. Chocolate peanut butter beer. That stout, I've made it a couple of times. Every time it turns out a little different. It's fun to have people taste a beer like that. Some people, it's the chocolate that comes out. Some people, it's the peanut butter, but almost nobody would nail it down and say, that's a chocolate peanut butter beer. So it's kind of fun to have those things and have people try something that you've made start to finish. Our wort, this is now wort, what's going to happen, we need two things. We need to mark the beginning of the boil so we can time it. Because we only need to boil an hour, we don't want to boil more, we don't want to boil less. So we want to mark the beginning of the boil. And, ooh, if you can get in here, there's sort of some cool hot break happening.
Excuse me?
Hot break.
Hot break. Okay.
So if you can, I don't know if it'll look and actually be able to show it, but see that flocking? Looks like flakes coming up. We're getting a hot break beginning. And what that is that the proteins are getting excited and grabbing onto each other. And those proteins are going to bind together into these flakes, and the flakes will keep getting bigger and bigger. And they'll settle out later. There's a hot break and there's a cold break. So right now we're watching hot break starting, but it'll really hit when we get right to the boil. And part of that is those little flakes like to make bubbles too. And that bubbles that don't just go away easy. So we'll get a foam cap, and that foam cap can rise up and then it insulates. So it's like putting a lid on the pot, only not just like a thin metal lid, but like a big foamy styrofoam lid that just traps all the heat, and then it heats faster and the reactions happen faster, and that's what a boil over is for these guys. Well, I think anything, and it'll just right over the top, and that it's like the stickiest, nastiest, hardest to clean substance on the face of the earth. I just added some Irish moss, which is basically seaweed. Somehow it helps the proteins coagulate, makes a clearer beer. And then I just added Y yeast beer nutrient, pretty fancy stuff. This helps the yeast really take hold and do its job of making alcohol and carbon dioxide even better than it would otherwise. Oh geez, my favorite type of beer is kind of a tough one. It's like asking who your favorite kid is if you're a parent, I'm guessing. There's so many good beers out there, but I really gravitate more towards Belgian styles. I really like yeast-driven flavors in beer. So I like things that have a little bit of clove spiciness to them. I like some of the beers that have like this awesome pineapple fruitiness that comes out of nowhere, and there are no pineapples in it. All of it comes from the yeast. And I like some of the spiciness that comes out of that. So that's probably my favorite style of beer, are any of the Belgian beers. So I think everyone thinks about wine as being the really complex beverage. Beer has so many more flavors than wine ever could. And part of that is just because beer has so many different components. It's not just grape juice. You know, and I'm not trying to denigrate wine. Like, wine is grape juice or fruit juice fermented, and it takes tremendous skill to do that well. Beer, you have the hops can change, the malt can change. You have all of these different things that can completely change the overall flavor of a beer just by changing an ingredient. So I'm about to put the wort chiller in. So this pot is not full of beer yet, it's full of wort. Wort is pre-beer. Becomes beer when we add the yeast after it's cooled later. This will eventually chill the beer, but right now this needs to be sanitized by boiling. So I just stick it in there, and it will boil all the nasty off of it, and then it'll be perfect when we finish in 15 minutes. Move the boil kettle from here over to here so that we can chill it with that sink there. So the coiled stainless steel tube that we put in 15 minutes ago is taking up the hot water, or the heat from the wort. It's steaming very slightly, and I'm running cold water through it, and hot water is coming out, and we're now chilling the 5 gallons of wort that we have left over until we get it down to about 65 degrees, which is a good temperature for pitching the yeast. Okay, so right now at the beginning of the chilling process is when the chilling's happening the fastest. This being boiling and our groundwater being like high 50s, low 60s, we have the greatest like thermal difference between the two. So this is chilling faster than it will at any other point. When we get closer to like that 60 mark, it takes a lot more water flowing through to take out heat. So we'll be able to speed it up when we get to the point that this water is no longer hot coming out by stirring it in the pot, and that just sets up, you know, so you don't have a boundary layer around the tube on the inside. So it's just like stirring a pot when you want it not to scorch on the bottom. You'd stir this so that it cools a little faster. So there are a lot of terms when it comes to beer that just don't necessarily make sense because they're not technical, but they have somehow worked it into either how we talk about beer or they are actually part of some of the laws. So when it comes to like the difference between, there are two big families of beer. There are lager beers and there are ale beers. And the difference between them, technically speaking, is the yeast used. Ale yeast is a worm-liking yeast that works from the top of a particular beer. As it ferments, it creates this krausen and this foam on top of the beer, and that's where the yeast hangs out and lives when it's in the process of transforming sugars into alcohol and CO2. A lager yeast likes cooler temperatures and hangs out at the bottom of the fermentation. So it sits on the bottom as it does all of its work. Now at the end of a fermentation, both yeasts end up at the bottom, and you want to siphon the clear beer off of the top and leave that yeast and all of the gunk on the bottom. But while they're working, the big difference are those two where they work. Ale on top, lager on the bottom. But somehow we've ended up using like a lager, oh, that's going to be like this, or an ale is going to taste like this. That isn't necessarily true. There are a lot of variety in what different things taste like. At the same time, you have words like stout, which describe technically particular styles, like Guinness is a stout. So stout is one of those words that has been used to describe both a technical brewing term for like a type of beer, like Guinness is a stout. But at the same time, other people have started using that as, boy, that beer is stout, like it's strong. But that actually has nothing to do with it. Guinness, everyone thinks is so strong, oh my gosh, it's got so much alcohol. Not really. It just has a lot more flavor than you're used to if you're drinking nothing but Busch Light. So that's really the biggest change that happens, is that stout describes a dark beer that's still thin, but also has this very like rocky, thick head because of the way it's served through nitro. So nitrogen instead of CO2 creates that head with super fine bubbles, and it changes the flavor of the beer significantly if you had it one without, one with.
Let it roll, let it roll, let it roll. Let it roll, let it roll, let it roll. Hey! Oi, man lacht seg opp, man noe med det. Sakke jorden seriøs, I sakser noe til det. Oi, man lacht seg opp, man noe med det.
We've now poured the wort into a sanitized bucket. That bucket is now topped with a sanitized fermentation lock, so that only allows air or CO2 to go out, not to come in. So we have a sanitized environment. It's not sterilized, but sanitized. And we're about to pitch the yeast. So what's a little bit different on this is, since I'm doing a lager, we need to make sure that we have lots and lots of yeast in there, because this is going to do its work at about 60 degrees in my basement, which is cooler than an ale yeast would work at. The difference between ale and lager is that a lager likes cool temperatures and works from the bottom, and an ale likes warmer temperatures and works from the top. There are yeasts that kind of bend that distinction, but that's what they are. So this little rainbow of yeast packets here is going to go in there. Ideally, it would be nice to have one strain and have enough packets for it, but I don't have enough packets of any one strain, and I want to make sure this beer takes off nicely. So I'm just going to mix and match 3 different styles of lager, pure lager yeast, and we'll just kind of go from there. One's a new one I've never used before. I'm kind of excited about it because I'm a geek like that. The others are just, they're all part of the Safe Lager from Fermentus. Really nice dry yeasts, so very exciting. So now we'll cut the top open and we'll pour them in. There's a lot of debate on whether or not you need to rehydrate your yeast. Since I'm pouring so much yeast into this beer, I'm not really worried about whether it hydrates properly or not, because there will be plenty of yeast. So I'm just cutting the corners off each one. And then we're just sprinkling. The only part to be careful of is make sure that we don't drop these packets in the wort because it's not sanitized. But this isn't wort anymore, it's now actually beer now that we've added the yeast. So we just seal this up. And oh, there we go. It's bubbling through, and the bubbles are the sanitizer coming out. This is Star San, so even if some of that got in there, it's all right because it's an acid-based. It'll taste just like the rest of the beer, just with a little more acid kick to it. So there we go. I am also the president of the Northern Light Brew Club, which myself and Harvey Lehman started about 2 years ago, maybe. I think we're in our 2nd year now. Before that, we were sort of just informally wine and beer people who really enjoyed making wine, and then I kind of run the beer end of things. And then we sort of just formalized a club. We have some tastings, we have monthly meetings on the 3rd Thursday of the month, and we meet here at the Little Fork VFW. Unless we're meeting somewhere else, and we do some tasting events and other things as well. So our brew club here in Little Fork that also encompasses the falls too, the Northern Light Brewers, we're always accepting new people who want to learn how to make wine or beer. I'm the president, but I also kind of lead the beer brewers in the group. Which are not as numerous as our wine brewers, who are usually led by Harvey Lehman. He's sort of our winemaking expert. We are always welcoming new members. We love having people who want to come and just taste and also want to find out how to learn. We do quite a bit of teaching. Last year I taught 2 or 3 different classes here at the VFW on beer making, and I know Harvey is always willing to teach someone how to make wine as well. Our meetings are the 3rd Thursday of every month, almost always. I say that because I think the next 3rd Thursday in November we're not going to have a meeting, but almost every 3rd Thursday we do that here at the Little Fork VFW. If you are interested in finding out more about us, we have a online Weebly website, and that has all of our contact information on there. Otherwise, if you see that the Northern Light Brewers are going to be at a tasting event, we hand out cards all the time with all of our info, and come and have a pint or come and have a taste with us. So.
Cut!
And thank you once again for joining us out in the Borderland. And a special thank you to the Bruin Pastor, Andy Berry, for teaching us something about his craft. Also, a big thank you to the Little Fork VFW. It's quite an establishment. Please join us again next time when we head out in the Borderland.